Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, it is now time to do some basic Media Composer editing in our timeline. In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about bin organization, what the heck a sequence template is, why there's different colors of the preview side and the program side inside of Media Composer, and then we're going to get in and put together a very basic edit using that awesome CineStudy footage that we talked about in our previous lessons. Now, as always, before we get rolling, I want to give a big shout out to Video Guys, our sponsor. Don't forget, if you're looking for Media Composer subscription licenses, head on down to the show notes below for the links. You can head on over to Video Guys' website, get that coupon code of MC101 to get 5% off your subscription license. And as always, I want to remind you that if you are interested in one-on-one Media Composer training, you can always send me an email at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. All of the lessons are recorded for you to save for your future reference. And I always give discounts if you want to get in and do multiple lessons to get you up to speed on whatever project you happen to be working on. And last but certainly not least, I want to remind you that if you find this tutorial useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it across social media to help us get the word out there about Media Composer to all of those editors in Premiere or in Resolve who maybe need to jump into Media Composer and get a project done, or maybe you've just been away from Media Composer for a while and you just want to freshen up on some great tips and tricks. Hopefully everybody can get something, whether it's a lot or even just that one little tidbit out of every lesson that we put up on the YouTube channel. All right, now before we get rolling, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that my interface might look a little bit different. You'll notice the taskbar down here looking very sleek and streamlined. That is because I have, since the last tutorial, updated my system to Windows 11. Windows 11 has been out for a while now and is qualified as of this recording with the most current version of Media Composer. And what I always will do is in the thumbnail for the lesson, I'll always put the version of Media Composer that I'm working on. So it's current as of that version, all right? And I always like to do that just so that people aren't ever sort of afraid to make the plunge into a new operating system. But keep in mind, Windows 11 has been out for a while now and Media Composer is qualified to run on it. When new operating systems come out, please, please, please do not update to those right away. Chances are Media Composer will not be qualified. You don't want to update in the middle of a project and then run into issues. All right, so let's Command or Alt and tab into Avid Media Composer. And I just want to talk a little bit before we get rolling about my bin container and the bins that I have in here, and not so much the bins, but also just the organization in general, because I believe I talked a little bit about how I have everything based around 4 bins: audio, graphics, clips, and sequences. 4 bins. Now, if you stick with those 4 bin concepts or those 4 bin names, you can never go wrong. Now, you're probably thinking right off the bat, well, Kev, what if I have voiceover and I have music and I have sound effects, etc., etc.? Well, that's where I get into folders replacing bins as far as my main hierarchy goes. So you'll see that I actually have 5 bins in here for footage, and I've organized them by the scene from the footage, coming to us courtesy of our good friends at cinestudy.org. And instead of getting in and having, footage 1, footage 2, footage 3, I've actually created a folder called footage. And to do that is actually very simple. Instead of hitting Command or Control and N on the keyboard to create a new bin, I'm simply going to right click and create a new folder. So if, for example, I wanted to create a folder for audio, and this bin here, not this folder, was going to be called music, I would then take music and simply stick it in that audio folder, and then I'm just going to create a new bin. I'm just going to call it FX, and I'm going to stick it in that audio folder. Maybe I'll just create one more here called VO. All right, maybe I should actually have capital V, capital O. There we go. And I'm going to stick that in the audio bin, and you can see I'm still sticking with the same hierarchy. It's just that I've now switched over to folders to contain everything, as opposed to getting in and actually, having hundreds of bins all in the same project called different things. Now, why do I do this? Do I suggest that you do it? Well, I suggest it only strictly from an organizational standpoint. What I also suggest it from is, I was an assistant before I was an editor. And one thing I would always want to make sure of is that, I worked the night shift. If someone called me during the day, I woke up half asleep. Kev, I'm looking for the whatever bin. I'm looking for the Scene A bin. Where is it? Oh, that's footage. Okay, it's going to be in the footage folder in the Scene A bin. It's always then very easy to explain to somebody where something might be if you don't happen to be in the edit room. All right. Now, what I am going to do is I'm just going to keep Scene A open here. So with Scene A open, what I'm going to do is navigate up to Windows, and I'm going to close all bins but the active one, because I only want to have Scene A and my sequences open. And what I'm going to do is just take that sequences bin, and I'm going to dock it down here at the bottom. Let's make sure we actually do that correctly here. So let me take it down here. Is it going to let me do it? Why don't I just slide it out of the way so I can actually see what I'm doing? There we go. Perfect. All right. Just going to bring it down here. Very nice. Okay. So let's talk about sequence creation. Now you're probably thinking, well, Kev, that's pretty straightforward. You're just going to create a new sequence. Now, first thing we always just want to double check is that the project's raster dimension is set to what we want it to be. I'm simply going to come into the Format tab. Remember, we cannot change the frame rate. We can only change the raster dimension, basically being 1920 by 1080. I'm perfectly happy with the way that things are. So let's create a new sequence. Now, how Media Composer editors are accustomed to creating default sequences is quite simple. Right-click, New Sequence. However, you'll notice that we have a little arrow here that now says Default Template. Now, by default, inside of Media Composer, we've always been able to just create a default timeline. Let's just say it has a video and 2 audio tracks. Or if my workflow happened to be that I always wanted a video track and 4 audio tracks, what we would do is simply head back into our settings. We'd come to User, we'd come down to our timeline settings, and we would actually be able to change that in here. But you'll see now that we actually don't have the ability to tell Media Composer exactly how many tracks we want to put on our timeline. So what happens when we create a new timeline? I'm going to right click and say New Sequence, and I can only choose the default template. You'll see Control Shift and N on the keyboard. So I'm just going to do that. And what's going to happen is this timeline is going to be created, and you'll see it has a video and 2 audio tracks. Let me just throw out there, what if we wanted to also have the option to create a timeline that had a video and 4 audio tracks? Well, this is where you'll see sequence templates come into play. And this is a newer feature inside of Media Composer that I want to show you right now. So what we're going to do, again, head back into our settings, Control Shift and equals, Command Shift and equals for all my Windows friends out there. You'll notice that we have our sequence template set to the default template, which gives us a video and 2 audio tracks, all right? So let me just double click on it, and you'll see we're now brought to the sequence template window where we can get in and create a new template. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to just create a new template. I'm just going to call this V1A12. I probably shouldn't call it that. I'll just call it A1-2, all right? And I'm going to say create. And what I'm going to do is just leave it exactly the way that it is. Okay, and what I should have actually done is I probably should have actually been more specific about the audio, because one thing that's important to keep in mind is that when you're dealing with audio tracks, much like in other applications, in Media Composer, an audio track can be one of many things. It can be mono, it can be stereo, it can be 5:1. There's a couple other options in there. To be honest, in most cases, for your editing, you're really only going to be dealing with mono and stereo. Now, why would you be dealing with mono and stereo? Well, music will come to you quite possibly as a stereo track. Effects can come to you as a stereo track. Anything that's going to come to you shot from a camera will be mono, because there's a microphone or maybe 2 microphones, so it could be dual mono. But chances are it's not going to be stereo. All right? Chances are coming from a camera, if it's got an interview with a voiceover or an interview with an on-camera dialogue, that's mono. If it's somebody speaking, as much as, people like to joke and say you can speak out of both sides of your mouth, meaning 2 audio channels, you can't. You're only dealing with 1 audio channel. So it's a matter of getting in and knowing how to set up your audio tracks based on what you do. All right, so let me give you an example. So I'm just going to call this V1A1A2. So let's say hypothetically, what I want to do is I want to create another template. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have voiceover, 2 channels of it, mono. On-camera dialogue, 2 channels of it, mono, a music stereo track, and an effects stereo track. So how would I go about setting that up? Well, the very first thing I actually want to do here is I want to make sure that my starting time code is actually correct. And normally what I'll do is I'll actually start it a little bit before the 1 hour mark. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this. There we go, very nice, because normally you'll have like a slate or something, or maybe a slate and a 2-beat before your show actually starts. So you can actually set that information right here. So let's create a new one. What I'm going to do is click on the drop down. I'm going to come down to create new. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this KPM standard tracks. All right. Now for me, I always have one video track when I start. If I want to add more, I can. All right, but what I will do is I'm actually going to add in 2 more audio tracks, and then I'm going to add 2 more. All right, now you're probably thinking, well, Kev, why do you only have 6 audio tracks? Let me show you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this video because that's really what it is. All right, track 1 is going to be VO1. Okay, we're going to call this track VO2. I'm going to call this track OCD, standing for On Camera Dialogue 1. I'm going to call the next track On Camera Dialogue 2. And then with the last 2 tracks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call them Music, and I'm going to call them FX. But what I want to draw your attention to is this column right here with the single speaker. A single speaker represents mono. This track will always be mono. This track will always be mono, 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 mono. So for a music track, maybe I want to make sure that that track is stereo. So how I go about changing that is that if I click on it, you'll see that it now doubles up with 2 speakers representing stereo. If I click again, 5-1, 7-1, and back to mono. So what I'm going to do with these 2 tracks is I'm going to set them both to be stereo, because chances are if I'm taking my effects from a sound effects library, it's going to come to me as stereo. If it's stuff they shot in the field, it could very well come as mono, but we can alter that after the fact if we want to. So what I'm now going to do is, again, make sure I set my time code. Okay. And what I'm going to do is just save this. And I'm going to say simply now cancel, because what I've done is in my sequence template, I now have the different timeline layouts for what I'm going to want to create. Now I just created the V1, A1, A2 just for the purposes of showing it to you, so I could actually delete that because the default is to create that. But with my KPM standard tracks, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to right click and say new sequence. You'll see KPM standard tracks. And now you'll see that because I not only got in and named it, but because I laid it out correctly with mono and stereo, I now have all of my audio tracks configured the way that I want them. Now, keep in mind, if you don't want to go through all of this in the beginning when you're only getting started, you don't have to. All you need to do is, I'm just going to delete everything here, is you can simply stick with the default template, which is going to give you a video and 2 audio tracks. And as you go, you can use the keyboard shortcut of Control or Command and Y to create new video tracks. Or what I can do is simply navigate up here to the timeline dropdown. You'll see that I have new, there's audio track, and you'll see that if I want to create a new mono track, Control or Command and U, or a new stereo track of Control, Shift, and U. So you'll see Control U, Control, Shift, and U. And then if you need to create a 5-1 track, you can obviously just create those manually by navigating up to timeline, coming to new, and coming to audio track. Or keep in mind, you could map that to the keyboard like we talked about in a previous lesson by mapping a menu command to either a button or something on the interface, or a button on the interface. Now I've completely screwed this sequence up for us to get rolling with. Again, delete, right click, new sequence, default template. We're now all good to go. So before we actually drop some clips in, I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on with the colors between the left side and the right side. Now, before we do that, let's actually give our sequence a name, our first timeline, or it could be our first sequence, depending on how you want to do this. I'm just going to give it a little bit of space here. Very nice. Now let's talk about the color here. We sort of got a green color here and a blue color over here. Now, I actually really like this, especially if you're new to Media Composer. And it was actually something that I believe was introduced in Media Composer first. So you'll notice that we have the blue color here that actually matches the blue color over here. All right. We have the green color over here that matches the green color over here. What these two represent is the green here represents the preview window, because I can see the green right here. All right. The blue here represents the timeline or the record side that we can actually see over here. Now, let's actually get a clip and drop it into our timeline. What I'm going to do, I can see that I have the clapboard there, so I don't want that. I'm just going to scroll down a little. There we go. There's our Psycho Killer. So let's have our Psycho Killer come in. I'm just going to mark an in point in my clip by pressing I on the keyboard. Now, I've added an out point, which I'm just going to remove by pressing F on the keyboard. Now, keep in mind, as I'm saying these shortcuts, these are the default Media Composer keyboard layout. And I'm going to be calling them out every time we do this. So you're going to get into a real habit of muscle memory as you hear stuff. I to mark an in point, O to mark an out point, D to remove that in point, F to remove that out point. Okay, you'll see, again, starting to get into the muscle memory. So right here, let's mark I on the keyboard. And what I want to do is just play the timeline now. So let's do that. I know the keyboard shortcut for play is I can either hit the spacebar to toggle playing, or I can simply press L on the keyboard. Here comes our Psycho Killer. Camera is going to...
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start that over.
Oh, you'll see he comes out. That's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring it down to here. And I'm going to mark that as an out point. Now, I don't want to hear the person speak.
I guess I need to know when.
Perfect, right there. I'm going to mark that as an out point. Now, one thing that people are accustomed to is really the dragging and dropping method of editing, which is common in Premiere, it's common in Resolve. Inside of Media Composer, not so much. In Media Composer, it's really all keyboard based. So let's talk a little bit about that right now. Now, one thing I want to point out is that when you're getting started in Media Composer, you may very much be a button clicking type of editor. You might say, oh, well, guess what? I see the shortcut for in point here. I see the shortcut for out point here. I see the play button here. I even see the editing capabilities of splice in and overwrite here down at the bottom of the preview window. Now, you can use those when you're getting rolling, but to be honest, the keyboard is really going to be your fastest way to do things. Left hand on the keyboard, right hand on the mouse, or if you are a left-handed mouse user, you're just going to do it in reverse. So what I'm going to do is instead of dragging this clip down into my timeline, I'm simply going to hit B on the keyboard to drop that first clip in. Now with the first clip, it doesn't matter if I do it as an insert or a splice in or an overwrite, because it's going to do the same thing. There's nothing in the timeline that's going to impact anything. Now, I just want to take a quick look at some of these other shots here. Now, this might be a better one to go with here. So what I'm going to do is just mark an in point. I'm going to hit play again.
Oh.
She pops up.
Look.
She looks out.
Spin.
And then he spins.
Go.
And she runs away. Perfect. Now this is actually really going to help us out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this clip and I'm actually going to overwrite what I've dropped into my timeline. I'm just going to turn off my smart tools here. And I'm going to overwrite what I've put into my timeline. Now, overwrite is red, insert is white. Now, it's called splice, and I'm going to refer to it from now on out as insert, just because we're talking about insert versus overwrite editing. What I want to do is lay this in right over top of what's already there. So what we want to do is use the shortcut of B on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows to do an overwrite. You'll see I hit B, it lays it in. It doesn't even look like that other clip was there. If you hit the wrong key and you hit V on the keyboard, you'll see that what it's done is it's taken this clip, it's dropped it into the timeline at the beginning, and pushed everything else down the timeline. Okay, so let's undo that. Let's hit B on the keyboard. There we go. Very nice. Now, I know that in scene B, I believe it is. Let's just make sure here. It's actually later in scene A, I believe. Angle 2. There we go. Because we want to have our talent pop out. And then she's going to run away. So let's just find a shot here. There we go. Very nice. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm just going to, again, roughly about here, mark an in point. I on the keyboard. I'm going to hit play. She pops out. And she runs away. Perfect. Now, what I normally like to do is I don't like to have her just pop out from nothing. I like to have her sort of, she's already started to make that movement and to cut on the movement. So I'm going to mark that as my in point, I on the keyboard, and I'm going to hit play again. She pops out, then she runs away. Perfect. Okay. So what I now want to do is I want to take this shot and I want to insert it into my timeline where she roughly pops out here. So she pops up there, she starts her movement there, but I see that she's going to start to pop out right about there. Now, she's actually right there. Perfect. So what we want to do is we want to get this on the movement. So I'm going to mark an in point right there, and I'm going to press play.
Spin.
Okay, there's the spin. Perfect. Okay, So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this now. Okay, couple ways that we can do this. Now, you could very well insert this next clip into your timeline and press around and monkey around and try to get it the way you like. But what I like to do is to remove what I don't need and only work with what I need. I know that I want to have her head pop out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out this part of the timeline. Now, what do I mean by cut out? Well, much like a splice in that affects everything down the timeline, like a ripple effect, what a cut is going to do is it's going to basically lift this clip out, this part of the clip, and it's going to bring everything down the timeline right back to where that end point is. So let's do this. Cut. Boom. So now if I come back and I press play, spacebar on the keyboard.
Look.
Okay.
Go.
And then she runs away. So what I want to do is I know that I'm going to have her run away. So let's come back here. Perfect. And I'm going to cut this out. So what I've done is I've actually prepped the timeline.
Look.
She pops her head out and looks, comes back when he looks, she runs away. Perfect. So let's just adjust what we're going to drop into our timeline. I'm going to come back, I'm going to press play. She pops her head out. Perfect. I've stopped right there. Again, I have my thumb on the keyboard. All I'm doing is toggling playing by doing that. Because remember what I told you. If you try to do that with the play key, the L key, and you just keep hitting it, it's just going to play your timeline faster. There you go. 192 frames per second. A little bit too fast, okay? So let's come back to my endpoint. To do that, the keyboard shortcut is Q to jump to an endpoint and W to jump to an out point. Now, if you start to think about these keyboard shortcuts I'm throwing out, IO, in and out, sitting beside each other on the keyboard, DF to remove in and out point, sitting beside each other on the keyboard, QW, jump to in and out point, sitting beside each other on the keyboard. You start to see how the keyboard has been laid out in a very clever way for you to get to where you need to get to very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get her to pop out. Perfect. Right there. I just hit the space bar to stop. I'm going to mark that as my out point. Now remember, what I need to do is to come back to this edit point, and I don't want to overwrite. I don't want to lay over top. I want to insert and push the timeline down, but you'll notice it's a little bit tricky to get to the actual edit point, which is slightly annoying. Now there's a keyboard shortcut that you can use to get there, but what I'm going to do is actually just hold Control or Command and click around where the edit point is, and you'll see I immediately jump right back to it. And I'm going to mark an in point, I for in point. Now you'll notice that I didn't mark an out point. And the question is, why didn't I mark an out point? Well, when we are doing what's called 3-point editing, which is what I'm doing right now, I don't need to mark an out point in my timeline because I've already determined how long I want the edit to be in the preview side. Now keep in mind, 3-point editing works both ways. You can mark 2 points, one in and out point in your clip and one in your timeline, or if you're trying to fill a very specific duration of your timeline, you can mark an in and out point here and only mark either an in or out point here in the preview side to accomplish the same thing. What I'm going to do now is simply hit V on the keyboard, and you'll notice insert, push everything down. Okay? What I'm going to do now is simply come back and hit play.
Look.
He turns around now. You'll see he doesn't turn around very quickly. I want to have him turn. Oh no, that was actually not too bad. What I want to do is once he turns around, he turns, I'm going to stop right there. Because what I'd like to do is to remove a little bit of the timeline. Again, mark an endpoint. You'll notice a lot of this is muscle memory. Mark an endpoint. Hold Control. Click on your edit. Mark an out point. Make sure all your tracks are selected. Remove that section by pressing X on the keyboard, because if I press Z, again, these two keys are beside each other, X is to cut, and again, bring all of your clips down together, and Z is to lift. You'll see what just happened. I lifted that clip out and left a gap in my timeline, which I don't want. I want to make sure that I cut it out. Now what I can do is check to see what's happening. He turns. I'm going to want to have her run away. She's going to go right about here, right to about there. Now that's going to be probably a little quick edit, but that's okay. I'm just going to come back now. I hit V on the keyboard to push down, to insert down the timeline. Pop out. He turns. She starts to run. And you'll see that she should actually be a little bit farther gone at that point. Maybe about there. Again, in and out point, I'm going to use X to cut this part of the clip out. Come back. There we go. Okay? So let's watch our scene here. Our psycho killer comes out. She pops up. sticks her head out, cuts back to her. He turns, she runs away. Now, to be honest, we probably could have got away with just having one shot here. Okay, I put 2 in just for the sake of showing you the edit. But what I can do is simply select all of this, and I can just lift it out, and then I can extend this down, and I'm just going to do it as a trim. Don't worry, we're going to talk about trimming in a later lesson. But you'll see now that if I do that, there we go, that now it's just a little bit smoother. She pops her head out, cuts back to him turning, she runs away. Very nice. All right. So you can see that what started to happen now is we started to notice a lot of things. Okay. We've noticed that I/O, in point, out point, beside each other on the keyboard. Jump to in and out point. Q, W, beside it on the keyboard, beside each other on the keyboard. D, F, remove in and out point beside each other on the keyboard. And even cut and lift, Z and X. Actually, let me rephrase that. Lift and cut, Z and X, again, beside each other on the keyboard. You will start to see that if you have your hand on the keyboard, these keys are all right beside each other and very, very easy to get to when you start editing. And you'll notice that I wasn't doing anything fancy here. Right now, we're only dealing with 1 video track and 2 audio tracks. In later lessons, I'm going to start to show you because we're going to be expanding on this edit as we go. All right. And I'm going to start to show you how we can start to add extra tracks of audio, extra tracks of video. We'll start adding sound effects. We'll add music in. And you'll start to see how this is really going to come into play when we have to get into routing audio to different tracks, when we have to get into adding audio effects on tracks. So this is a great thing to get in and to start with. You'll notice that I really only used 2 clips. I used scene A, angle 1, take 2. And what was the other shot here? Scene A, scene A, angle 1, take 2, and scene A, angle 2, multiple takes. Those are really the only 2 clips that I used. All right. So I used multiple takes, and I believe I used take 2. There we go. So these 2 right here are really the only 2 that you need to get in and start practicing with so that you can start to get the hang of how this keyboard shortcuts are going to work as you're starting to drop things into your timeline. And you'll notice that as you do it more and more, you'll get faster and much more efficient to get that job done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. All right, so I think that's a good place to leave off for this lesson because we did cover a lot in this lesson. So as we wrap up, as always, I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Video Guys. Don't forget, if you need those Media Composer licenses, the links are in the show notes below. Use that coupon code of MC101 to get 5% off your Media Composer purchase. I also want to remind you that if you like this tutorial, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it across social media. And if you have any questions, and even if you want to get more information about one-on-one training, don't hesitate to send me an email at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.